without further ado, do we have any questions or comments? Kick us off. Back here. Okay.
Hi, thank you, first of all. Okay. I have a question kind of tying in the last session into this session. I really appreciate that you're looking at communication for helping to solve these problems, because I think a lot of the times we have to have the communication before we can have the actual medical intervention, because they won't go with the medical intervention right away. So when I'm thinking about the last session, we talked about how we have to have different messages for different communities. And I think about the mental health struggle that my students have. I'm a communication professor, and we estimate about 30% of our students suffer from anxiety or depression. And talking about things like gender, talking about things like class, and how those intersect with mental health, because it's one thing for a male, right, to be talking about mental health when we have this macho kind of idea. And then also talking about survivors. So I have a friend who has been through 2 terrorist attacks, but as an observer, right, as someone who was there, didn't get hurt or anything, and her notion to herself is, her story to herself is, well, I have no right to feel this way because I wasn't hurt, I wasn't directly affected, right? So there are a lot of people who have almost that survivor's guilt tying into mental health. So I'd really like to hear your responses to that.
So I'll start. You said something really important, which is, and it's hard to do, but you have to see everyone for where they are in their journey. And it's interesting, something that we talk about as a company is we have to move away from one size fits all, because we know that a solution for one person may not be a solution for another. And so that's something that I think makes things a lot harder, as you know. It also ensures then that you have to listen, because you have to know where your people are at. The only other thing that I would add from more of a communications lens that has been so important for us, we've focused on something that we call full spectrum diversity. And what I mean by that is, I think lately from a corporate perspective, there is focus on gender, or there is focus on experience. But what happens is, because we're not looking at everyone, it can feel like there's winners and losers. And so something that we focus on is belonging, and how do we make everyone feel like they belong. What's been fascinating for us to see as a company was the moment that we pivoted to belonging, we could see an increase in engagement, an increase in inclusion, an increase in diversity. And so I think that framing of belonging can help people wherever they are, kind of on their own journey, and it's something that we use from a communication perspective. Thank you.
And I think, just to add to that, I think reframing the way we talk about mental health is not just depression, anxiety, substance abuse. Mental health is also joy, resilience, all the positive things we think about, right? And so thinking about that concept of mental health is health. It's not just the absence of XYZ disease. And so just changing that framing in terms of how we think about it, and also, as Fran said, not having that one-size-fits-all approach, whether it's for the individual or for the community. There are certainly interventions that have been proven effective for broader communities, but you still have to tailor to the individual.
Great. Yes, Katie.
Taking that internationally, and all the places that don't have the same view of mental health, or don't even believe that mental illness exists. Mm-hmm. In Haiti, I had patients who were tied to trees because they were schizophrenic, and blinded because they saw things, and their ears had things in them because they heard things. And taking, in our society, it's one thing. There, it's somewhere else. How does Americans deal with that in the places where we work?
Yeah, that's a great question, and certainly a challenge, because mental health means a lot of different things to different communities and in different parts of the world. And so I think the power of partnership, we talked about the power of partnership in the context of the donor and kind of partner relationship. I think that power of partnership really comes to play when you think about mental health intervention. So engaging the community, and having people with lived experience be part of the solution, right? So, not just designing programs for communities or for people, but having them be part of the process. And I think that's going to really vary depending on how mental health is viewed in different communities, because there are still a lot of communities that view mental health conditions as an illness, and the shame and the stigma. And so I think we have to really adapt our approach depending on the specific community and the people that we're working with.
I'm wondering if, Glenn, would you feel comfortable commenting on that as well, given that you've translated 7 Cups into 180 different languages, and what that process was like?
Yeah, sorry, I should clarify. So we have people that provide support in 140 languages, but
thank you
the
for the
site will be
clarification.
translated into about 12 different languages.
Okay,
deeply
sorry,
soon.
thank you.
Sorry. Yeah, I think it's really key. I think part of it is like the tag on the site is "wanna chat." So I think sometimes you just want to make it easy for somebody to take that initial step, and then I think using anonymity is really kind of powerful and helpful too, for people to begin to explore and ask questions and sort through things. I mean, the street theater play idea, I think there's a lot of ways we can do education around this that doesn't have to be threatening, that doesn't have to be stigma provoking, where the messaging can get across in a non-threatening way. And I think I love to see that play, because I think we're beginning to optimize the messaging to provide the education, but we've got a lot of work to do there.
Atia?
So I really, just a quick comment and then a question. First, I just wanted to say thank you for all of your different perspectives on mental health. As someone who was involved in psychological trauma response coordination after the marathon bombings and several other incidents that we had in Boston, you see the stigma associated with mental illness, even in that context, right? And so one of the things I think is really important is this idea of normalizing, right? So this idea that you all put out there of mental health as not just about the absence of an illness, but like, what does it look like from a strengths-based perspective? Like, how do we foster it in people? And so that said, one other thing, which is this idea that we live in a society, even here in America, where there's a lot of stigma around mental illness, right? So every society has stigma around mental illness. No one is exempt from it, because we don't talk about it, which is what Cisco is doing is so powerful. And so with that in mind, how do you think, or where do you see the next evolution of the work that you all are doing? Like, where kind of long term do you see the evolution of how we actually help people have the resilience to support their mental health?
Yeah, something that's really fascinating for us was that the first step was to make it okay to share. And even in the sharing, there's such a continuum of experiences, right? And I think there's education in that. One of the things that's next for us is how do we train 12,000 managers to do more and to be better listeners and to know what questions to ask. There were little things as we started. I remember the team told me as we were preparing for the company meeting that was dedicated to mental health, tell leaders not to ask someone, how are you, but how are you today? And the realization that that opens a conversation in channels. And so I think part of what's next is it possible for us to have 12,000 managers that are so much more aware and know how to handle this issue. I think a subset of our leaders are like, bring it on. Like, we'd love to do this. And I think for a subset, both from a culture and geographic perspective and beyond, where they're still thinking, why are we talking about this at work? And so I think that's what we look at in a part of what's next.
Yeah, I can add, in Canada, what we introduced was amazing, those seminars that we're doing on a quarterly basis, and the discussions after the seminars of people sharing their stories. That is helping a lot of other people come forward. We did an event where we do a lot of volunteerings, our team and team events, and instead of going to a homeless shelter, we did it at the mental health institution, where we brought 45 people, and they're all young people, and we actually volunteered at the hospital. In seeing that and bringing it back to the organization, people are starting to ask, okay, are we doing another event? Can we do this? Can we go? And they're telling us about other organizations that are doing something similar, that we could actually take it globally in Canada, which is amazing. So the more we talk about it, the more we introduce some of the things that we're doing, the more people are asking us to do more, which is very, very encouraging.
If I could add just one other thing.
Yes.
I think just, Atia, you hit it home. This is such an issue both for developing and developed countries. I think one statement that really resonates with me is the former director of the mental health unit for the WHO has said that when it comes to mental health, every country is a developing country. So no country has kind of arrived when it comes to mental health. And so for AmeriCares, when we think about the evolution of our work, it really focuses both here in the US as well as internationally, and to continue to build that capacity around task sharing. I think Glenn mentioned it, and not having that access to mental health services sit with specialists, and to really open up that access with non-specialists, lay people, community members, so that more and more people are able to access, whether it's listening or other kinds of support services as well.
Just to quickly jump in, I think that's a really great point. Clay Shirky's a smart guy, and he has this idea called the cognitive surplus. So like when we're not watching TV or playing video games, humans can create amazing things like Wikipedia, right? And I think there's a compassion surplus too. That there's a lot of us who have really big hearts, and we want to love, and we want to care, and we want to reach out. If we can unlock that, if we can make it easier for people to care, we can scale this up, because there's never going to be enough clinicians no matter where we are in the world. I mean, we just don't have the resources. So the societal challenges we're facing, I mean, you heard all the stats earlier and the personal stories. It's really on all of us to kind of figure this out. And we do have to really train lay folks to do a lot of this. Like that in technology, to me, is how we're going to make a dent in these challenges.
And the other thing, Atia, by the way, I am so stealing your quote when you said, so just so you know, when you said if it's not your crisis, it's not visible to you. Our Prime Minister in Canada, Justin Trudeau's mother, has been struggling with mental health for 20 years. His wife just came out with a mental health, and she was on stage talking about it. And our government just actually announced $3.5 billion dedicated just for mental health. So let's hope more big leaders have, issues at home that they could just be able to talk about it and give us more money to do something with it. So.
Okay, next question over here.
Hi, this is a slightly selfish question, but I feel like there's a brain trust up here. So, what about kids? Because I have a toddler, and I think about how I teach her how to tell me when her knee hurts or when her head hurts or something like that. I don't have any idea what's developmentally appropriate for engaging with children, or really who's responsible. I know I'm responsible, but who else is responsible, and how we're doing that collectively. Because it definitely didn't talk about it when I was in school. And I found my way to it myself, so I'm not really sure. So based on what you experience, or what's the newest thinking in the field, how do we get kids to be little advocates of mental health wellness?
Who would feel, Glenn, maybe?
Sure.
Can I go toss this one to you?
Sure. So 90% of the folks on 7 Cups are younger than 35. So I think part of it is making care accessible to people and non-threatening. And in terms of education, I think a lot can be done. There's a lot of more mindfulness being done in schools. I think there is a lot that part of the challenge is we've done actually a pretty nice job of destigmatizing things. So we've increased demand for the services, but we've not paralleled the supply. We haven't increased the supply. That's why the training regular folks, teachers, educators, everybody else, to deploy services is going to be so critical. And I think addressing and using really basic psychoeducation, especially for kids, I mean, emotions are really bodily. So, saying things like, you feel heavy, that might be sadness. And giving kids words, and you're right, you brought up somatic complaints, so bodily, like I feel tired. Pairing physiological experiences with emotions can really help people. So that kind of shortness of breath, that's anxiety. It's okay. You have a big test today. So normalizing things, you're not alone, universalizing things, but again, to a strengths-based approach, for kids to thrive, you need high warmth and you need high expectations. I love you like crazy, and I really want you to do a good job. And I'm going to support you through this. And building that resiliency, right? So we talk about grit. So, nobody likes stressing their kids out, right? But helping kids master things, helping kids deliberately grow through things, I think that's what we have to do to deliberately build resiliency.
The other thing that works, and I'm trying it right now, I'll tell you if it works on me, but I'm hearing it from a lot of people every time I have the discussion, is especially mothers are taking their young kids with them to yoga. Because apparently it is the best thing because it helps you learn how to breathe and deal with situation. I just tried it last week. I went 3 times and it actually works in hot yoga. So that you could probably start them young, so you never know.
All right, I think we have time for one more question. Anyone right here?
I have a question too of the concept of healing the healers. What you do in your organizations to help folks that's providing the services to on the phone or in the field?
I can start. So at AmeriCares, that is a very important part of our work, both in the field, at headquarters. Our organization has set up resources where, for example, if any of our staff deploy during an emergency, we have the opportunity to talk anonymously to a counselor about our experience, any challenges that we may be facing. That's also, and that's open to all of our staff. That's also a big focus, as was mentioned by Kate in the emergency session, really focusing on the caregiver. And so building up capacity amongst those that are caring for others affected by disaster and helping to build those coping skills and resilience. So that's an important part of our work.
I think a good metaphor for this, I think, is this idea of the emotional gas tank, right? So we all have an emotional gas tank. You can all figure it out, like where are you at now? Like how full are you? Are you halfway? Are you low? Are you high? And just normalizing that a little bit, I think, helps. And I was talking to Kristen earlier about this. Healthcare providers, oftentimes the tanks are low because it's really hard, stressful work. And you have to be you kind of have to be the hero. You have to keep that front up, like, hey, everything's fine. So I think part of it is normalizing it, and I think she's doing some super smart work around that. Like, hey, this is tough work. Let's be real about this. And then I think a lot of it is psychoeducation too, and like just reminding people. So like on 7 Cups, if you've been listening for a certain amount of time, we pop a little modal that says, this is a little box that says, hey, look, we care for you. You're carrying a lot right now. Why don't you think about taking a walk, or getting outside in nature, or doing a mindfulness exercise? So, ultimately where this is going to go is your phone knows everything about you, right? It knows your daily use patterns. It knows if you're sleeping. It knows if you're not sleeping. It knows if you're isolated. It knows if you're not isolated. eventually, I think what will happen is the sensors on your phone, loved ones, there'll be more of a dashboard almost, like, hey, some of your signals here suggest you might need a little bit of break, or maybe talk to a friend. So I think that's where this will evolve to.
And at Cisco, we use the extended benefit plan. I use it. I mean, we fought for it, or I go to friend.
All right, actually, I've been told we have another couple of minutes until lunch is ready. So there were a few hands still in the back, so I'm going to field a few more. Right here, gentleman in the center. Yes.
So could any of you comment about pet therapy? I'm a person who has a dog who participates in pet therapy, and it's remarkable how adults and especially children can respond to, in our case, we have a dog. Dogs are the most common parts of pet therapy, but other animals as well.
So that's awesome. I want to ask Fran on stage in front of all of you if she's going to allow us to bring our pets to work.
So
In Canada, I'd love to do that.
You know what? It's funny. We do in the U.S. And so our employees can bring their pets into the office. And it's funny. It changes, the dynamic of the office in a very positive way. And there are people that just come out and engage with your dog that wouldn't come out and engage with you, which is powerful. So we will look at it for Canada.
Please, thank you. Actually, the Toronto airport, it just launched a month ago a section for pets where especially travelers and executives that are on the go all the time. So if you have an hour, you could actually go to a section now where you could spend time with a dog or a cat or anybody, which is awesome. I haven't tried it yet, but it was just launched in Canada, which I think it's a genius idea. Every airport should have a pet therapy session.
I think pet therapy is an incredible opportunity. I think you actually, Brenda, right behind you, is a doctor of veterinary medicine. We were just talking about this before the session, but I've interviewed people struggling with severe mental illness, so people that have chronic challenges, and if they have a cat in their life, right, it helps so much. I don't think we fully understand the power of animals yet, and how much warmth and unconditional positive regard and acceptance, and right, dogs, right, humans' best friends. Like, there's a reason. There has been some interesting studies that looking at stressed out families, when they have an animal, the animal absorbs some of the stress, so that the stress is not as much on the family. And from a strengths-based approach, I almost wonder if having an animal amplifies some of the positives too. So I don't think we yet fully understand it, but I think it's huge potential.
Over here, yes.
On the issue of stigma, if you were to quantify it, where is North America in terms of dealing with the issue of stigma? 1 to 10, maybe it's -1. And are there, given all of your work around the world, are there examples of societies or countries? I take your point that nobody's cracked the code, but are there lessons that could be learned, societies or countries that are doing this?
So I think in the U.S. we still have a lot of issues around stigma, and globally. I want to just make the point that I think we've come a really long way in terms of raising awareness on mental health. So even the fact that mental health is now included in the Sustainable Development Goals is a huge accomplishment and the result of so many efforts around advocacy. I think that there are some examples in terms of countries that are doing mental health well. I think, honestly, Europe, I think, is a good example of certain countries that prioritize mental health, that time with family and unplugging, and that concept of time away from work or other things. And I think there's a lot of lessons to be learned there. And I say this having just come from a conference in Geneva and having these conversations with some of my colleagues that were, just sharing their experiences in their workplaces compared with what we might be experiencing here in the U.S. So I think there are certainly some good examples, but we still have a very long way to go around stigma here in the U.S.
Okay. One last one, and then we'll wrap up. Okay, in the back.
Thank you. With the new generation coming up with just texting, Snapchatting, really amplifying that isolation, and how that, I mean, my thoughts around how is that going to impact mental health? And I'm sure that's going to go way up, right? Because now they don't really want to vocalize what they're feeling, but just want to text it. My son could tell me a whole problem in a long text, but can't talk to me. So communication issues, how, I mean, this is what's coming to us, because I think the generation now still can talk about it. What are your thoughts on this new generation coming up and the impact with mental health?
It's really a good question. I mean, we know loneliness is skyrocketing, right? So the UK, which is I think usually out front a little bit, they have like a loneliness officer now that's really trying to address this. In America, it's something like, I don't know, 40% of Americans report feeling lonely. It's really pretty significant. And the truth is, we don't yet know how all these technologies are impacting the younger generation's minds. We don't have all of the data yet. Some of it is, some of the data is not great. So I think we're going to have to be pretty deliberate about building relationships. I think we have to develop if we look at our societal stats that were shared earlier, we know we've got some real challenges. And so it's going to be a matter of steering into them and saying, hey, interpersonal contact, even if it's uncomfortable, right? Like any new skill, if you don't know how to dribble a basketball, you practice enough, you can learn how to dribble a basketball, right? So you might be more comfortable, texting, but hey, I'm going to sit with you and I'm going to talk with you, and you're just going to have to hang out with me for 5 minutes while I talk to you, and then it's going to be a little less threatening. But we're going to have to return to really deeply caring for one another. Human-to-human connection, compassion, that's our way through. I don't know how we figure this out without caring for one another.
I would add 2 quick things. It's really interesting because right now, companies are feeling like they actually have to invest a little bit more for the students coming out of college to prepare them from a communication perspective coming into companies. I think this is part of it. And it's not just written communications, which is I think what we did before, but now it's the verbal and the connection. And on the flip side, because I want to end on a somewhat positive note here, what's fascinating is that from a recruitment perspective, where we are most successful is where we hire groups of individuals into the company where they can create community.
Yeah.
And so there's still a desire to have communities. I think they're just defining them a bit differently. And again, I think this is a really strange situation where the workplace could be the place that you go to find your community, but there's still interest in that. I think we're just having to cultivate it a bit more than perhaps in the past.
And if I could just add, I'll talk about it just from a lens of a mother. I have a 30-year-old and a 25-year-old, and they know, oh, mom doesn't text or doesn't call, and they're moved out of the house. It's only about FaceTime or face-to-face, because it starts home. And it starts at home when they're really, really young. Technology is amazing and it's very powerful, but you have to know when to use technology to your benefit for you and your kids. So my 30-year-old daughter, she knows if she has a serious conversation, don't text me because I'm not going to respond. Wait until I see you face to face, or it's going to be FaceTime. And I think if we start them early enough, and now the conversation are starting early in elementary schools, but the difference between IQ and EQ, because a lot of these kids are coming out from university, can't even have a conversation. So there is so much weighing on EQ versus IQ. In fact, a lot of large organizations now removing certifications out of their hiring criteria because they want that emotional part. So I think it's so important for us to start them young at home and have that conversation and have that emotional portion, because it's so important. And you know what? I've always done it. When it's family time, I take my phone and I put it aside. It's crazy that sometimes you disconnect, but it's so powerful. Once you try it first and you put your phone aside, they'll be forced to put their phone aside and sit with you at least. If you can start with 15 minutes first, that's better than nothing. And then it graduates up to an hour a day, a week, which is amazing. So it worked for me with my 2 kids, and hopefully it will work with you.
All right, thank you to our speakers. So, as you've heard today, poor mental health is a global concern, but small steps like the ones we've heard today can have great impact. So, I ask you now again to think about where you fit in this conversation and to commit to one small step that will advance mental health in your world. So maybe you will work with HR to ensure that the people in your organization have accessibility to mental health resources. Maybe you will look inward and commit to your own wellness. We know that prevention is as important as treatment and care. Maybe you will take a mental health first aid course like I did and be equipped with the tools to help a troubled stranger and maybe save a life. So please take a moment today and pause and send yourself an email, a text, set a reminder on your phone, and commit to just one small step that will promote better mental health. And with your partnership and your commitment to this, we will have committed to over 135 small steps. And with that, when we combine them all together, we will have begun a pathway to better mental health. So thank you.